The government's fear of Dr. King was behind the plot to kill him.
Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine, messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you're too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name.
Something is terribly wrong here, and the United States is in danger.
No matter where it leads, no matter what abuses it may bring, I'm going to tell the truth.
In 67, a couple years later, they disinvite him from the White House. In 68, they shoot him dead.
Others can do what they want to do. That's their business. Other civil rights leaders, for various reasons, refuse or can't take a stand or have to go along with the administration. That's their business. But I must say tonight that I know that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Can we honestly say that it doesn't affect our security and the fight for peace when Negroes and others are denied their full constitutional rights? When we in this country...
Our city and our county has been subjected to the greatest pressures I think any community in the country has had to withstand. We've had in our area here outside agitation groups of all levels. We've had Martin Luther King. We have had...
You take Martin Luther King, that is being led by communists all over this great country, feels that he has the key to the White House. He has the telephone call to the White House that can get anything he wants.
Well, I've just gotten through a couple of weeks ago with a 45 or 46-day battle of Ingram Park, I call it. That's the park there in Birmingham where we stopped Martin Luther King. And I mean, ladies and gentlemen, we had that nigger whipped.
You've had some rather personal and trying experiences yourself. Are you afraid?
No, I'm not. My attitude is that this is a great cause, it is a great issue that we are confronted with, and that the consequences for my personal life are not particularly important.
The black man got a champion. They call him Martin Luther King. We call him Lucifer. And if this nigger thinks he can stir the niggers up, I'll go also inform him that the white man can be stirred up to defend what is rightfully his.
We want change! We want change!
America for white, Africa for black. Send those apes back to the tree, ship those niggers back. Ring that bell, shout for joy, white man's day is here. No more niggers, civil rights, led by niggers where. America for white, Africa for black. Send those apes back to the tree, ship those niggers back. Ship those niggers back. Ship those niggers back.
All the people of the South are in favor of segregation. And Supreme Court or no Supreme Court, we are going to maintain...
We never have any trouble until some of our southern niggers go up north and the NAACP talks to them and they come back home.
But believe me, there were those that followed Hitler, like you blindly follow this Sheriff Clark, who didn't think their day would come. But they also were pulled into the courtrooms
and they were also given their death sentences.
I'm tired of living every day under the threat of death. I have no martyr complex. I want to live as long as anybody in this building tonight, and sometimes I begin to doubt whether I'm going to make it through. I must confess I'm tired.
The thought of his own death was one that often came because people were threatening all the time. But I think when the president went down, I think all of us had a little lump in our throats because we knew that if they take out a president, that he can take out Martin.
What did he say to you when he came up to you, sir?
Well, he said, I want to see you. I told him earlier at the courthouse that he could speak at our meeting tonight if he wanted to, and I invited him and told him that he could have 15 minutes. So I asked him if he was planning to come, and he said, I want to see you about that. Can I step over? And I said, yes. He came over and started hitting me.
Where'd you hit him again?
Right here.
Right forward.
And then after they pulled him away, he started kicking me.
Are you injured in any way? Do you feel any...
I don't think so. I just feel a slight headache. I'm sure that'll pass away.
Will you press charges against this man?
No, I don't plan to.
John F. Kennedy died. We were sitting together, and he said, that's exactly what's going to happen to me.
God has told me that he wants freedom for his people. And I'm not going to run from the responsibility. It may even mean physical death, but if it means that I will die standing up for the freedom of my people, God has spoken to me. They were there to really assassinate me, but that they could never get me as a clear target because I was surrounded. But that wasn't the scariest moment. Philadelphia, Mississippi, and Chicago on the day that we marched through that narrow street. And we marched by 4,000 or 5,000 people that day, but they were intrigued.
Martin was not an inside Washington guy. You know, Johnson loved to deal with people. He was a checkers player, move these people around. He couldn't move Martin around that way. And then there was Hoover. Always sitting on Johnson's ear, spilling poison in it about Martin.
J. Edgar Hoover was the original director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. J. Edgar Hoover was more popular than most presidents.
Dr. King was threatening to the America that Mr. Hoover believed in and saw and wanted.
Hoover, I think, had a pathological hatred of black people.
From Washington, D.C., Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr., president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, will face the nation.
Dr. King, it's been alleged that you have been slow to sever your ties with alleged communists in the civil rights movement, even after government officials have warned you against them.
First, I'd like to say that communism is based on an ethical relativism, a metaphysical materialism, a denial of human freedom, and a crippling totalitarianism that I could never accept. The only person that they identified that had any connection with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was removed. He's been off of our staff a long, long time.
Well, this places you in the direct opposite position of the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, J. Edgar Hoover, who gave some testimony recently to the contrary.
I would hope that the FBI would come out and say something that I think is much more significant, and that is that it is amazing that so few Negroes have turned to communism in the light of that desperate plight. I think it is one of the amazing developments of the 20th century, how loyal the Negro has remained to America in spite of his long night of oppression and discrimination.
We most certainly do not and will not give protection to civil rights workers. In the first place, the FBI is not a police organization. It's purely an investigative organization, and the protection of individual citizens, either natives of the state or coming into the state, is a matter for the local authorities. The FBI will not participate in any such protection.
But the FBI can make arrests. on-the-spot arrest. They do it in many other cases where you have narcotics, auto thefts, bank robberies. It's only when you come to civil rights that there is this tendency to be rather slow.
Hoover was obsessed with King. He wanted to bring King down as a leader. Why that was, I think, is because he criticized the Bureau. The fact that Dr. King was black and criticized the Bureau probably made it that much worse.
When King was chosen for the Nobel Peace Prize in October 1964, it was almost more than Edgar could stand.
When he began to talk about the redistribution of wealth, you have to understand he was coming up against the most powerful forces in this land.
We have stood up for nonviolence with all of our hearts, and those who will make this peaceful revolution impossible will make a violent revolution inevitable. And it didn't cost the nation 1 penny to integrate lunch counters. It didn't cost the nation 1 penny to guarantee the right to vote. But now we are dealing with issues that cannot be solved without the nation spending billions of dollars and undergoing a radical redistribution of economic power.
It's vicious racism.
Civil rights leader Martin Luther King leads the procession to the United Nations, where he urges UN pressure to force the U.S. to stop bombing North Vietnam.
The FBI worked to discredit King and continued its surveillance of him and his associates.
The promises of the Great Society have been shot down on the battlefield of Vietnam, making the poor, white and Negro, bear the heaviest burdens both at the front and at home. Others can do what they want to do. That's their business. Other civil rights leaders, for various reasons, refuse or can't take a stand or have to go along with the administration. That's their business. But I must say tonight that I know that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The world now demands a maturity of America that we may not be able to achieve. It demands that we admit that we have been wrong from the beginning of our adventure in Vietnam, that we have been detrimental to the life of the Vietnamese people. The situation is one in which we must be ready to turn sharply from our present ways. The New Testament says, repent. It is time for America to repent now, for the kingdom of God is at hand. Oh, our government and the press generally won't tell us these things, but God told me to tell you this morning. The truth must be told. I'm convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of value. We must rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society when machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, militarism, and economic exploitation are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our present policies. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth with righteous indignation. And don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. You don't change your ways. I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name.
He went from being someone whom Lyndon Johnson had brought to the White House on his way back from winning the Nobel Prize to someone, once he gave his speech attacking the war in '67, and you'll have to pardon the language, Johnson referred to as a nigger preacher.
The Poor People's Campaign would recruit among all races, bring them to Washington, commit massive civil disobedience, force the government to respond, a nonviolent army of the poor.
Very frankly, this is a search for an alternative to riots. And if the nation doesn't respond to us, as we labor that 2 or 3 months, however long it takes, God only knows what we will face in terms of chaos. This is a kind of last desperate demand for the nation to respond to nonviolence.
Martin King committing himself to bring 500,000 people to Washington, not just on a march, but for an encampment, to stay there until the Congress changed its priorities, was a devastating potential for those who resided in the halls of power in America. They thought the nation would burn. They thought the Capitol would be subject to a mighty revolution. Martin King was at the center of all of this. He was the key figure of dissent and opposition leadership in America.
They were really and truly afraid of us coming to Washington. And they were determined to try to stop us.
Martin King, as you know, came out and gave a speech called Why I'm Opposed to Vietnam. And in that speech, he talked about God's judgment on America. He talked about America being arrogant. This is King, who we love so much and revere and have the holiday and cast as a dreamer. He talked about an arrogant America. He talked about God's judgment on America. And he said these words at the time, that the U.S. is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. The minute he said that, he fell off the list of the most admired Americans. In 1967, they disinvited him to the White House. Here's a guy who in 64 and 65 helped Lyndon Johnson sign the Voting Rights and Civil Rights Act. In 67, a couple of years later, they disinvite him from the White House. In 68, they shoot him dead. Part of being a patriot means to stand as a truth teller and say what's got to be said. What's
never
wrong right
said it
now?
like that. But just so you don't get into trouble, the they that disinvited him from the White House is a little different than the they who shot him dead. Shot him dead, shot him dead, shot him dead, shot him dead.
I can debate
No?
you. I can debate you.
Really?
I can debate you.
It's an evil war. No matter where it leads, no matter what abuses it may bring, I'm gonna tell the truth.
It scared the Army that a man had that much strength in the United States could influence a war that they were losing.
Army intelligence officers were certain King was leading a revolution.
Dr. King then was becoming an enemy.
And when King announced plans to lead hundreds of thousands in a Poor People's March on Washington, James Earl Ray's attorney William Pepper says government leaders became even more alarmed.
And when they viewed the Pentagon demonstration in October of '67, they got what they thought was a taste of barbarians at the gate.
The government's fear of Dr. King was behind the plot to kill him.
They told me that the Army would never have let Dr. King get to Washington. And then they said, well, let's just say we would have stopped him somehow. Something is terribly wrong here, and the United States is in danger.
Shot him dead, shot him dead, shot him dead, shot him dead.
No matter where it leads, no matter what abuses it may bring.
You see, the real problem with violence is that we have never been violent. We have been too nonviolent.
I'm I'm gonna tell the truth, truth. I'm gonna tell the truth.
Even the dark clouds of political crisis gathered over America. After a deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy, our nation turned to Gerald Ford and a select handful of others to make sense of that madness. And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but the Warren Commission report will always have the final definitive say on this tragic matter. Why? Because Jerry Ford put his name on it, and Jerry Ford's word was always good.
Because he issued U.S. notes and called for the abolition of the Federal Reserve and he printed these U.S. notes to stop the British bankers and the private banks from destroying the U.S. economy. So George Bush, whose father, Prescott Bush, was on the U.S. Senate Banking Committee, was very interested in maintaining the Federal Reserve and ripping off the United States. President Kennedy wanted to abolish the Federal Reserve and put the U.S. back on the silver standard and the gold standard and producing things of value. So this, we believe, is George Bush. Now, George Bush was asked where he was the day Kennedy was assassinated, and he said, "I cannot remember where I was." But funny thing is, he called the FBI and reported a guy named Parrott as being one of the people who had assassinated President Kennedy. Just before this picture of him was taken, proving that he was in Dallas, Texas, and was trying to manipulate the investigation of the assassination of President Kennedy.
I heard the shot, and I say shot because I immediately thought it was a shot. I immediately thought it was a rifle shot. Fear just swept through me, and I turned, thinking that the shot had come from back over my right shoulder. So I turned, and I obviously saw nothing but a tremendous crowd of people where we had just come. And I saw nothing unusual, nothing out of the way, except people also had startled looks on their faces. They were turning, they were looking, and I didn't catch him in the corner of my eye. So I was in the process of turning to my left, and that's when I felt the impact of the bullet that hit me. Went in my back shoulder and came out my chest right here. I felt as if someone had just hit me in the back, a sharp blow with a doubled up fist. It more or less knocked me over, at least enough to where I looked down, and of course I was covered with blood, and frankly thought that I had been fatally hit.
So frankly, I thought I had been fatally hit. My wife pulled me down in her lap. She was seated in the jump seat on my left, and I was seated in the jump seat directly in front of the president. She pulled me down into her lap. At about that time, I heard another shot, about that loud, a smack. And my eyes were open, I was conscious, and I saw the blue velour interior of this presidential limousine covered with blood and brain tissue. And I knew that the target had been fatally hit. I knew it was the president because Ms. Kennedy said, she just screamed, "My God, I've got his brains in my hand." "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you now." And he said, "No,